He joins me now, Sky News Political Editor Andrew Clennell. You're obviously in Canberra, Andrew. We'll get to the punters out there, the voters in a moment. But how's this gone down around the halls of Parliament House? Has Labor got a spring in its step?
There's absolutely no doubt about that. They do have a spring in their step. They feel like they're up mojo-wise. It's a bit like when they did the stage 3 tax cuts rejig, and that was well received. I guess that glow only lasted for 3 or 4 weeks, although it also got them through Dunkley. So that definitely is the case. From the opposition's point of view, that there are many there who are now convinced there'll be an election this year.
Yeah, I'll get to that in a moment. I want to look at how it was sold, the budget out there in newspaper land. You're an old newspaper man, so I thought this is worth putting up on the screen for people. The Australian, well, they ran a caricature of Jim Chalmers this morning. They had the headline, "Bung it on Afterpay." That's, of course, referring to all the spending being added to our $900 billion debt. The Sydney Morning Herald, it was critical of the $300 energy rebate, saying that Labor can't subsidise its way to lower inflation without impacting interest rates. Ross Greenwood made that point just now. The Herald Sun, well, they ran charmed and dangerous, putting the handouts in one column and the fact that the government's glossing over the debt burden in another. Tough or fair, do you think, Andrew, this morning, the prints?
I think a lot of it's pretty fair because there is a fair bit of political trickery in this budget. We both know that, Peter, but maybe it'll work. I mean, they think they've played a political blinder. I don't think there's any Australians who are going to be unhappy they get $300 off their energy bill. There's cynicism whether that actually cuts inflation. These guys are saying it does. Really? Anyway, and they've got tax cuts coming at the same time and they're delivering a surplus. In a way, you don't get a better economic story for Jim Chalmers. You certainly wouldn't get a better story if you went to a budget again in March before an election in May, which is why I'm in the camp that it's highly likely, or at least likely, that they will go to an election this year.
Well, the Prime Minister doesn't pay his power bill, as we know. Taxpayers paid at the Lodge in Kirribilli. I think it's a long time he's paid one if he thinks $300 goes anywhere near covering the increases. Just on the election issue, because you and I both picked up the fact that we were promised an interest rate cut about now. Then it was pushed out to Christmas. Now the budget papers say there is no rate cut forecast at all until the middle of next year. You pinged the Treasurer on this today. We've played that grab a little earlier on. So you say there's a lot of flexibility in this budget for them to go early. You look at the handouts, I think that's probably right. We've got a state poll in October. We've got a WA election in March. The next budget's due in March. I reckon they'll call it at the end of this year or next year, and they can do it around the time of WA and still avoid another budget. What do you think?
I reckon more likely December 7, November 30. I don't think you want to get calling it at the same time as WA. That would be a bit of an affront to WA. There's actually provision, I think, to get the WA election moved, but WA is such a key swing seat for state, should I say, for them. They won't want to be annoying WA. So there's only a couple of windows.
But you can call it after WA.
Queensland.
You can call it after WA.
Yeah, that's right. You can
call it after WA and still miss the budget.
Yeah, but then you promised a budget in March. So WA is about March, whatever it is. If you don't have a budget there, people are going to say, where the hell's your budget? So, no, I don't think that works either. They'd have to produce a budget then and go in April or May. So, look, I just think it's geared towards it. I'm not saying Albanese's made up his mind, but, gee, he changed his language this morning. And it just looks obvious, Peter, to be frank. I mean, look at the alternative. I mean, there's a risk with any scenario, right? You could call an election and then the Reserve Bank could hike rates, for example. But as things stand, if they wait for May, there's every chance from what we see in these numbers and what we see in the economy and what we hear from Michelle Bullock, there's no rate cut before May. Now, how are people going to be by May? Yep. They're going to be happy. They're going to be prepared to give you a chance more in November. So, look, it ratchets up from here. Peter Dutton's got this budget reply, and I understand a big housing policy coming tomorrow night. And so, that'll be keenly watched. It's always in that last year, or perhaps less in this case, of that 3-year cycle that everything ratchets up. And I very much have that feeling this week. We're in election mode already almost.
Just quickly, I want to point out migration too. They said they'd bring it down. They've got these soft caps, they call them, on international students. But if you look at the numbers last night, you can see they've already had to uplift or revise their forecast upwards for migration numbers this financial year. In my EFO in December, they said net overseas migration would come in at 375,000, 100,000 there. It's now expected that number's going to be close to 400,000. They say it'll then fall to 260,000 and then it'll fall again to 255,000. Well, none of these numbers they've landed at all. And even when you get out to 235,000 in the out years, I mean, that's the biggest numbers we'd ever seen before this government in Australia's history. They occurred under Big Australia Kevin Rudd. I mean, this is a shocker. And overall, I think the numbers are 1.6 million people coming over the next 4 years.
Well, how could you have any confidence that they reach the 260 when the last 2 years they've had 518 and 395 and they predicted 375? That's your point. And the other interesting aspect to that is the Treasurer himself has admitted that one of the reasons he's able to come up with this optimistic inflation forecast is because they're putting the brakes supposedly on migration. Well, I think it takes a while for the wheels to go in motion, for those brakes to be on. So it's just such a rubbery forecast, I've got to say. I'd probably, take a bit more stock of the Reserve Bank's forecast, which is bad news for any of us with mortgages.
Good tip there on Peter Dutton. I've got him coming up. I'll see what he can tell us. Thank you, Andrew Clennell.